If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's a story you don't tell people because they wouldn't believe it? I don't tell this story because it's just a little too strange. Like a glitch in the Matrix. I am a skeptic by nature, BTW, and I do think it was a big coincidence, but it's just odd as hell. So one day I'm at home and I get a phone call. On the other end is a young woman and someone called her from this number and said they had her cat. Well, I told her she must have the wrong number because I certainly didn't call her and I don't have anyone's cat. So that was it and she hung up. About 10 minutes later I go to get my mail. I'm on the first floor, leaving my apartment door open, and as soon as I open the door to the vestibule, where the mailboxes are, in sprints a black and white cat into my apartment. I go back into my apartment and there's this cat sitting, perching, on the arm of my couch, staring at me. I'm kind of surprised at this point. I mean, I just told someone I didn't have any random cats in my apartment and suddenly there's one on my couch. Anyway, so I notice the cat has a tag on its collar. Hi, my name is Skittles, not real name. If I'm lost, call this number. So I call the number. It's the young woman who just called me 10 minutes ago. This is going to sound weird, I said, but now I have your cat. Well, she came over, looked at me very suspiciously and thanked me and left. I have no explanation for this. I accept it's a coincidence, but it's a hell of a coincidence. I think I saw some kind of, I don't know, spirit or demon. Or some kind of shadow being once. I was doing some training one afternoon about 6-ish years ago. I was in an office and there was an instructor telling us all about job safety, etc. I was zoning out, not really paying attention. It was broad daylight outside. The room I was in had about 6 monitors, and on those monitors it was displaying security camera footage. Mostly the sidewalks, outside traffic. Out of the corner of my eye I caught some kind of shadow on one of the monitors, but the shadow was moving along the sidewalk very fast, and what's more, it didn't look like a shadow on the ground, it looked like a ball. A ball of shadow just drifting along the sidewalk like a tumbleweed, very fast. I caught it just out of the corner of my eye and it went off screen. I started looking at all the other screens to see if it popped up, and sure enough, it did pop up on another screen, still traveling down the sidewalk, then it crossed the street, and I could just barely see a car stop in front of it. The shadow ball lifted up off the ground, went over the car, and then back down onto the street on the other side of the car. And on the screen I saw the car just sit there for a moment, and then take off. The shadow went completely off screen and I never saw it again. Now, as with all claims like this, it could have been anything, who the duck knows. But it was very unsettling to see. The light would almost bend around it, wherever it would move, and it was translucent. And whatever it was, that car saw it too, and stopped. Somewhere out there, someone else saw that thing, and I'll never meet them and be able to ask if it was as weird looking as I thought it was. And truth be told, today is the first time I've ever told anyone that story. Honestly, I probably wouldn't believe me. I work security at a double lockdown, inpatient psychiatric hospital. We have several units that specialize in both chemical dependence and mental health disorders. My unit is the stabilization unit, SU, so if you're really off your rocker or you feel like getting violent, you come visit me. We get a call for a possibly violent patient and I go check it out. It's a very tall, very slender young girl wearing what can only charitably be described as rags. Her hair is unkempt and clearly has become estranged from shampoo, and she is covered from head to toe in filth that I'm praying is not her own. She's in rough shape, clearly sick, and needs some help. She doesn't respond to any verbal questions or commands, but we can lead her around pretty easily. I'm starting to wonder why they called me up. They tell me to put her on the SU, and a couple nurses are going to clean her up a little bit, put her in scrubs, and get her sorted out. They lead her into the shower, and the patient starts screaming. Then the nurses start screaming. Then everyone starts screaming. This poor young woman is covered in what are clearly human bite marks. Everyone is freaking the duck out. The patient didn't want to be undressed and is lashing out wildly, so she had to be put in 4-point restraints, wrists and ankles tied to the bed. All the staff are in various stages of shock, crying, praying, rending of garments, etc. Someone had clearly been keeping this young, mentally ill girl captive and abusing her for quite some time. The bites are across her torso and appendages and there are both new and old ones. The nursing supervisor immediately calls the cops and we just stand around staring blankly at each other thinking about how ducked up people are to each other, and the evil in this world. One of the nurses, who had been in psych nursing longer than I had been alive, suddenly yells, "You gotta be ducking kidding me." The patient had craned her neck over and sunk her teeth into the meat of her upper arm, blood oozing from between her lips. We had to put a spit shield over her face to stop her from trying. All of the bites were self-inflicted. She was able to contort herself in ways that I didn't think possible. I still think about her a lot, and I don't think yoga is as sexy anymore. When I was about 9 or 10, my grandparents and I were living in a somewhat large town in Pennsylvania. I would ride my bike around the block we lived on and never had many problems until one day it was close to sunset and I was just about to turn the last corner that looped back to the road our house was on. A large group of people were outside of their house and they were all laughing loudly and goofing off, I assume. They decided to sort of form a wall across the sidewalk in front of me, while more of them kind of boxed me in from behind. One of them, a guy, stepped forward and grabbed my handlebars, got right in my face and started yelling at me while his friends laughed and carried on. He pushed me off of the bike onto the ground and started laughing manically. He kind of pushed the bike hard, it landed on me, and he started moving towards me again, so I jumped up, pulled my bike with me kind of into a bush on the side to get away, got on it and pedaled like hell to get home. My grandma was pretty pissed I was banged up, but thought it was my fault for being a stupid kid. About 2 weeks later I found a newspaper on the kitchen table with that guy's face on the front cover. He was arrested for killing an old lady just down the road from our house. My grandma never believed me, but I could never forget that guy's face. My brother was chilling in his room in the basement last summer, playing Xbox with his headphones on. He thought he heard a weird noise upstairs but just thought it was our older brother getting home since he generally sounds like a herd of elephants. He took his headphones off and heard the front door slamming. He decided to go upstairs to grab a snack and see who else was home now. He ran up the stairs and noticed the air was a little hazy. He opened the door to the garage to check for vehicles indicating that people were home, and flames came shooting out at him. Our house was on fire. Turns out the noises upstairs were from a neighbor who saw the fire and ran into the house. I had left the front door unlocked when I left 2 hours previously. The neighbor had grabbed our dog and yelled to see if anyone else was home, then ran out. The fire started in the garage and spread to the roof/attic. It melted our smoke detectors from above, so the alarms never went off. When my brother realized the house was on fire, he ran back downstairs because he thought I was still home. When he saw that I wasn't in my bedroom, he ran back upstairs, looked for our dog, then finally saw the neighbor holding her outside. He took 5 steps outside, saw that our mom's vehicle in the driveway was very close to the fire, and thought he should grab her keys to back it up. He turned around and there was fire entirely blocking the front door. Good thing, because if he tried to start it, it may have exploded with how hot it was. He called my parents after calling 911 and my mom laughed because she thought he was joking. He wasn't. Our house burnt down in the middle of the day, plus my mom's vehicle ended up lighting on fire and basically melted from the heat. The very next day, I received my acceptance letter for med school in the mail. I like to go hiking. Back about 10 years ago, I went out into western NY with a friend and my then husband. We hiked through the woods for hours and were about to make camp before the sun started to go down. We came to a river, took off our packs, and suddenly I heard our friend make a gasping noise and freeze. Across the water, perhaps 20 yards away, was a creature staring at us. It was about 8 feet tall and absolutely massive in frame and musculature. We stared at it, it stared back. It felt like forever but was probably just a minute or so. Then it turned and walked off into the woods. This broke the spell and we all tossed our packs back on and ran off the way we had come. We never stopped to camp. We didn't stop until we got back to the truck around midnight. Our friend, who lives up there, said it was a Wendigo. I have no clue if it was a Sasquatch, a Wendigo, or just some enormous dude somehow ducking with us, but I will never hike in western NY again. I don't ever want to see that again. I know people would think I'm nuts, but there is no real acceptable explanation. I lived in middle of nowhere Vermont, which translates to anywhere that isn't Burlington, Middlebury, or Rutland. So I had to drive about an hour if I wanted to go see a movie. Anyway, my friend and I decided to go see that new Wes Anderson film and it was early March or something, so on our way back home it started snowing, which isn't uncommon in Vermont in March, and I had decided to go home using the back roads instead of the highway on a whim. So we were on a heavily forested dirt road at around midnight, and there was a house maybe every mile or so. I was going about 15 to 20 miles per hour because it was snowing and I was on a dirt road. The radio was turned down and there was just this natural lull in the conversation, when I noticed this area on the right side of the road near the trees where the snow was paused in mid-air. It was just a box of air where the snow was suspended and refused to fall, and the snow above it that tried to fall into the area was building up near the top the way it will on someone's shoulders or a tree branch. I took that in maybe 5 to 10 seconds before I was past it, and the car was still quiet until we went down this little hill and came to a stop sign at the end of the road. I stopped and waited at the sign for a minute and then asked, "Did you see that?" And my friend let out a sigh and told me he had just assumed he was seeing things because he was tired and wasn't going to mention it unless I said something. So we sat at the stop sign for a good 5 minutes making sure we definitely saw the same phenomena, and then decided to drive back to see if we could see it again. Whatever it was had ceased its strangeness, and we both made a bunch of jokes about being the idiots who stick around and go back in a horror movie on the ride back, but the way the snow just sorta hung in the air like there was an object there I couldn't see is an image that is going to stick in my head for a long time, I think. It wasn't scary at all, it was just super weird, and I have no way of explaining it other than as some sort of funky air current. I don't tell the story usually because it seems like I'm making a big deal out of a little wind, but I wish I could have gotten a video or seen it again when we went back. My buddy put out one rap album and pretty much just shared it with his friends in college. He had a release party, but it was really him buying a keg and putting it at the pool of our apartment complex while he rapped over his beats. The guy can rap, but he really can't sing, and one of his tracks is completely sung and is a bit cringeworthy. Fast forward to 2 years later, my friend is in town visiting a bunch of people. I'm at his friend's house once night and we've got a group hanging out in the backyard. Eventually it's time for me to get going, and my rapper friend says he'll walk me out to the front of the house. 2 girls are walking up the front yard when we come around the house, and one screams and says, "Oh my god, it's rapper friend." I stand back, shocked at what I'm seeing. The girl introduces herself and her friend and says, "Oh my god, can you sing, cringeworthy song, for me?" I still can't believe what's happening. Rapper friend says, "Well, I don't know the lyrics off the top of my head, but I'll sing it for you once I finish with my friend here." The girl was so excited, jumping for joy. She ran off to the backyard and I walked home. Later I'd find out he did sing her the song, and when rapper friend told all our college friends what happened, they didn't believe him, until I stepped in and validated the story. I was working the night shift as a security guard for some office building. Next to me was this new guy which I didn't really know. He was kinda chatty and seemed a bit like a prat, but it gets boring and his talking kept me awake, so I didn't mind too much. Halfway through he starts talking about religion. Asks me if I'm religious, to which I reply that I'm not. Apparently to him that was an invitation to go on some rant about how God didn't exist, basically if a benevolent God existed, then the world wouldn't be in this state, ergo God doesn't exist or he isn't benevolent and shouldn't be worshipped argument. I'm not particularly interested in holding a debate with him, so I nod every now and then to keep up appearances, play with my phone and watch the cameras. Stuff like that. Eventually he finishes his speech triumphantly, going something like that is why, my friend, I believe God doesn't exist. Satisfied at having converted an invisible audience, he gets up, stretches and goes off for God knows what, maybe to make some coffee or something. Crash. The grill from the light fixture overhead falls down in the center of the room, not far from where we're sitting. Not exactly close either, but if he had been walking about it probably would have hit him. Doubt it would have killed him, but it would probably have hurt pretty bad. His face goes white and he sits back down. He doesn't talk much after that, and particularly not about religion. We were the only 2 in the room, so I'm the one that has to try and figure out why the thing fell down. Turns out it wasn't screwed in properly, but as to why it chose to fall apart at that particular moment, I wouldn't know. When I was in pre-K, around Easter, we had an activity at school where we decorated Easter eggs. Now, I would assume that they were hard-boiled, but each kid got to take one home, and I remember mine being a hideous orange and yellow one. But I was cool with it, because I designed that hideous egg. At home, I played with the egg some. After a little while, I got bored and left the egg on the floor. Eventually, I returned to it, after a few hours, but to my absolute horror as a 4-year-old, my egg was broken in pieces and there was a dead chick lying in the broken pieces. I was very sad, not just because it was a poor little dead chick, but also because it would have been cool to have a pet chicken. Anyway, my parents ended up disposing of it. And I was scarred for life. Not really. That would have bothered some kids, but I was fine, lol. So, yeah, that's my story that people don't believe. Partly because I was pretty young when it happened. My sister and I have exceptional memory from a young age, though. I myself don't understand how it happened, since I'm pretty sure the teachers bought the eggs from the store, and they would have been boiled before being handed over to a bunch of 4-year-olds to decorate. So I don't know how the probably already dead chick hatched and then died afterwards, unless there's some gross explanation about gases from dead stuff or something. Ick. Sometimes I wonder how much I believe it myself, but an old friend went down to Haiti on a mission trip and came back with a story that he heard firsthand. This guy is on the short list of guys I'd call in a serious emergency, very trustworthy guy and not one to embellish, so here goes. They were saying that a man that lived in Haiti was visiting people's homes spreading the word of Jesus when he came across a young lady's house where something was wrong. Voodoo and things of the like were very widespread and practiced in this area. The lady had a scarf, nothing crazy, just covered with cherries or something trivial, that was given to her by a stranger that she had never seen before and hadn't seen since. The man took the scarf with much urgency and went to the bank of a body of water. The lady asked what he was doing and he said he felt the scarf was possessed, for lack of a better word, so he tossed it a few feet into the water. After it sat there floating for a few moments, the scarf began to slink towards the shore on its own like a snake. The man grabbed it, soaked it in alcohol, and lit it on fire. It didn't burn like fabric, it burnt, and smelt, of flesh. I believe they said it was intended to retake the form of the snake and kill the woman while she slept. I'm sure I forgot some details, but the man who witnessed this swears up and down on his life that it happened exactly like that. Voodoo is a strange thing and I wouldn't put it past something like that happening. I worked at a Boy Scout camp one year in the Deep South. 3-week camp, takes up all of June. Well, week 3 is what we call Mormon Week, or the LDS encampment. About 300 or so people, all seemingly nice. For those who don't know, the BSA is the Mormon Church's mandated youth program. So a great many of the boys going are virtually made to go. That being said, the week got itself a reputation for pranks and whatnot. Being my second year, I didn't expect anything bad. Around Wednesday night, a group of boys went pranking. They tried to scare other scouts in another campsite, sprayed shaving cream in the bed of an adult leader's truck, and decided to ding-dong ditch the 18-plus male staff cabin. They tried to prevent exit by tying the front door shut. However, they didn't realize there was a back door. Being past lights out, they scattered to the wind. The over-18s went looking for them. One unfortunate staffer, a guy who helped run the craft area, went down the nature trail. There, he was jumped by Mormons. A large group of them attacked the poor bastard, kicked him, punched him and even choked him. We later learned that it was both scouts and assistant scoutmasters who attacked him. It was so bad that a policeman came out, the state president of the church came to address the scout troops, and all further pranking was banned. I and many other staffers carried weapons, knives and whatnot, from then on, and traveled in groups. The staffer, nevertheless, came back out after a day of rest. I'm not even sure anyone will believe me here, as I'm still confused about it myself, but here goes. Anyone ever seen that show Awake? I think it was called that, Pretty May, but the whole concept was that a guy wakes up in one version of his world, son survived car crash, and when he falls asleep there, wakes up in another version, wife survived car crash, and each time he sleeps, it swaps, the date of course not changing until he's lived both versions. My whole life I've had a similar effect, but the difference is more massive, it's a completely different world. I won't bore you with all the biographical details, but I've talked to some less skeptical friends on the side, let's call it E, for Earth, and some on the other, let's call it R, mainly because the first person I mentioned it to was in R, and she suggested mentioning it on E. The scientific community in R is somewhat more advanced, I'd say it's where we'd be in 7 to 10 years. My age is about the same, time seems to correct itself even if I duck up my sleep schedule. The language isn't the same, but I know both as if they were. The physics isn't the same, there's 2 fundamental particles in R that don't exist in E. Or maybe we just haven't discovered them? I'm not a physicist, I'm not sure whether they could exist here, though they might explain the divide between the strong and weak forces. Again, not a physicist, not in R either, totally could be a full of shit statement. The geography is very different, and was the first thing to rule out an alternate Earth theory. It's not like a dream either, the physics and society are consistent, the natural laws stay the same from day to day, and I do have dreams between the two, so I know what a dream is like. It doesn't serve a psychological purpose like a recurring dream may, and it's been lifelong. But I've lived my life there and here, at this point, I'm not sure which is the dream, or if they may just both be real. None of it makes sense to me. I've told a couple people this before, but I'm not sure if I believe it myself anymore. Do you believe in ghosts? About 5 years ago, I had a nightmare. I wasn't sick at the time, so I've discounted the possibility of it being a fever dream. Now, normally, I don't get nightmares. I've had some weird dreams before, but even the worst of them is just that, weird. This one was something else. Normally nightmares have some long terrible thing that's happening that you're trying to avoid. This one wasn't like that. For all intents and purposes, it was a normal dream. Until the face appeared. My dream was about two people who were investigating some temple of some kind. Things were going along normally, with nothing out of the ordinary until they walked up to this rock to investigate it. The rock turned into a decapitated head making a horrible grimace and I shot awake instantly. If that were the end of it, that would be believable, but when I woke up, I swear to God that face was in my room. It was on the wall above my head and it was staring out into the center of the room with a blank stare. I thought I was maybe seeing things until the head turned and looked at me, and then dove straight at me. I tried to move out of the way, but I was lying down in bed under thick blankets and this thing was fast. As it passed through me, I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed. It only lasted about 3 seconds, but it felt like forever and I was scared to death that I was going to be trapped comatose. When I was finally able to breathe again, my heart rate was insane. I started searching around the room for the head thing, trying to brace myself for whatever might happen next, but it was gone. Still, I couldn't really go back to sleep after that and I sure as hell wasn't going to keep the lights out, so I crept over and turned on the lights and went back to sit on my bed, still searching the room frantically for this thing. With the lights on I was a little more at ease, but I kept searching just to be sure that what happened to me wasn't just something in the room that I had mistaken for something else. I couldn't find anything even remotely close to what I had seen though. Then, an hour later, at 3 a.m., a shape appeared through my door. I say a shape, because it didn't really have a form. Have you ever looked at a mirage and saw the lines of heat waves rising off the road or whatever it is that's so hot? You can see something moving back and forth in the air. It's transparent, but you can focus on it. That's exactly what this thing looked like, except instead of rising through the air, it was confined to a solid shape. That shape melted through my door, and just sat there. I would say it was staring at me, but it certainly didn't have any visible eyes. It was if energy had taken on some sort of form, like a blob of mirage goo. I didn't do anything at this point but just stare at it. If it could stop me from breathing just by touching me, I didn't want to go anywhere near it. Occasionally it would shift around the room. Sometimes floating in the air, or through the floor, or resting next to my desk in a heap. Mind you, this was with the lights on, so I knew I wasn't mistaking an old pile of clothes for some creature. Eventually, at around 5 a.m., I realized it was gone. I say that because it was as if only parts of it disappeared at a time. I was safe for the rest of the night, but that wasn't the last I saw of it. I saw the same floating mirage thing the next night, and the night after that, and a couple weeks later. No weird floating head dream, but the mirage was like clockwork. It would just show up sometime around 2 a.m. and move around the room. Eventually it just stopped showing up. The last time I saw one of those things was a couple of years ago, when I was awake late one night at around 3 a.m. At this point I had gotten used to them, so I wasn't as scared, but I just sort of accepted that maybe these things just exist. I haven't looked for them since, so I haven't seen any. You kind of have to look hard to see that mirage-like stuff, but I'm sure they're still around somewhere. I don't usually tell this to people because they'll think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw, and I'll never forget what it felt like when that thing passed through me. I've got a couple instances. First being when I was in summer school for Intro to Band. Basically it's a single course for elementary grads going into middle school. They teach you maintenance and basics of whatever instrument you wanted to use through middle school. I had a clarinet. So explanation aside, it was after class and I was running around the high school, where the course was held, with my childhood best friend and we started playing on the payphone. We did a couple crank calls using the old 1-800 CALLATT that we saw in commercials. And once we got bored we decided to run across the street to the 7-Eleven and get Slurpees. I realized I didn't have any money and went to check the payphone's coin return slot. It was empty. So I sent my friend to the store. Out of sheer boredom I just started punching in random numbers into the phone while I was waiting. And next thing you know I hear what sounded like a series of the clicks you hear when someone hangs up. I thought that's weird and assumed I broke it. I put the phone back onto the receiver and started to walk away when I hear a rush of coins start pouring out of the return. Altogether it was $17.50. Growing up, I was quite clumsy. I'd get too excited or my mind would be on something else. That mixed with a dad who was tired from work most of the time and short on patience, meant I got sternly told off quite a lot. I ended up being quite scared of my dad, which meant from my child perspective, the tellings off felt like being shouted at by a giant. Most of my memories of this happening have blurred and mixed into one, except one time when I was 7. My nan had just died. She lived next door and was everything you dream of a nan being as a kid. So when my dad told me she was gone, the tears didn't stop coming. I don't know how long I cried until my dad came to me saying we needed to go get my older brother from Cubs. I couldn't stop the waterworks, my mind couldn't think of anything except she was gone. So my dad's words of stop crying now fell on deaf ears. Until he actually shouted them. And I stopped. We picked up my brother. I go up to our shared bedroom later and he's crying. I ask why. He screams that Nan's dead and all I do is say oh and stand there. Since then I've never cried at a dead pet or lost family member. I just have a feeling like that oh moment. When I was 13 years old I had sex with my best friend's mom. It all started when I went over to his house one day after school for a sleepover. A little backstory on his mom: she and her husband had gotten divorced about 5 years before and she hadn't started dating yet at the time. She was shorter, around 5 feet 5 inches. I remember always sneaking looks in at her when my friend wasn't paying attention, but I didn't think either of them had noticed. Anyway, after we got to his house after school, his mom yelled at him that she told him to clean his room before I came over and to go do it now. She was laying outside tanning at the time and told me I could wait outside with her. She was laying on her stomach and I could tell that she didn't have a top on when out of the blue she started asking me about stuff with girls. That's when she rolled over, looked at me and said I need about tree fitty. That's about when I noticed it wasn't my friend's mom, it was that goddamned Loch Ness monster. I was 16 maybe? My cousin's family in California has a big plot of land, I'd say easily 2 acres. It's all fenced off and the edges have trees with dirt and shrubbery filling up the rest of the land behind our cousin's house. The land isn't uniformly flat, it has its hills, and the back, maybe half acre, is almost a valley of sorts. Anyways, I was staying up with my cousin who was 20 at the time. When my family visits we all tend to stay up really late with the parents out back around a campfire drinking away. It was about 1 a.m. and my cousin, whose name are Ramin but we'll call Bob to conceal his identity, and I were watching X-Files. He told me how if you walk out back in the backyard sometimes you can see weird lights in the sky, and because we couldn't go to sleep, we decided to go have a look. By this time of night, it was only our mothers around the campfire talking, everyone else had gone to bed. Bob and I walked away from the campfire a ways and got down to the valley part of their property. We were just looking up at the night sky, really not expecting to see anything. After about 5 minutes of us just chatting and looking up at the sky, we heard a slight rustling in the shrubbery ahead of us. It was too dark to see what it was, but judging from the sound I would expect this thing to be about 40 feet in front of us. We both got quiet and tried to make out what it was. The fence surrounding the property had some holes in it and we had seen small coyotes in the property before. This wasn't some coyote though. After about a moment, it stopped rustling in the shrubbery, and it was dead quiet for a second or two. The next thing I remember was hearing this thing take 2 or 3 steps towards us, and you know how you can tell how heavy a footstep is and from that deduct how big the foot that made the footstep must be? Yeah, this was a human-sized foot, at least. After its 2-3 steps it paused again. Afterwards, it charged, I think. I remember it taking footsteps that were faster than the 2 or 3 that it just took, and the footsteps were getting louder. It was coming right at us. Bob and I looked in each other's eyes, saw the panic on our faces and then pulled a 180 and sprinted as fast as we ever have back into the safety of the light from the campfire. Once we got to the back door of the house, we paused and looked back to see if we could see what the hell was chasing us. Our mothers were still around the campfire, as if nothing had happened. However, their dog, who was tied up to the back of the house, looked off in the direction we had just ran from and started barking like mad. Bob and I ran back into the house and tried to get some sleep, which eventually did come to us. The next morning we headed back out to see if we could find any footsteps of any kind. With the fact that neither of us are expert trackers in mind, we didn't find anything out of the norm. To this day we have no clue what it was, even if it wasn't anything paranormal and just a human chasing us. I still get goosebumps thinking about what would have happened if we had not run away when we did. This is 100% true and I rarely tell people because I feel people are just going to think I'm making it up or at least exaggerating. So anyway, back in 2013 there was a music festival in Dublin, Ireland called Electric Picnic. I live about a 2-hour drive from Dublin. 2 of my friends had tickets to just the Saturday of the festival but me and another guy didn't, but we wanted to go. Many times we had went to a concert venue on the day and got tickets sometimes even cheaper, so we said we would chance it. So we left that morning and we were already looking for tickets online, none to be found, but we didn't think any problem. We got to Dublin, I parked my car at my friend's and we get in bus into the center so we can get the bus to the venue, all the time looking online and asking people for tickets, again no joy. We finally get to the venue and we ask everybody, and I mean everybody, and honestly not a single ticket to be found, not that they were overpriced or anything, just nobody had spare tickets. I think we were searching for around 2 hours when we finally gave up, so we said we would go to the shop to get something to eat. I can't remember what I was doing, but I remember my friend said to me, "Come on, let's go." I was like, "What?" But I knew something was up with him, so I followed him. After we had got to a safe distance, he told me he saw an envelope on the ground, and what was it in? 2 tickets. Was so beast. Obviously I know it was a bit douchey, but honestly, what could we have done? One night I just finished working out with a friend. It was late on a Friday night, around midnight or so. We were standing by our cars talking before we left, and a man was walking by to a drugstore nearby. It was the only other place open besides the gym, and he looked a little suspicious, so I kept an eye on him. As he walked by, he said, "Make sure y'all are careful out there, there's a lot of drunk drivers." Sure enough, that thought stuck in my mind, and on my way home a woman cut across the turn lane from the opposite direction and came right into my lane, which I could almost feel was about to happen, and I was somewhat mentally prepared for it since the man told me to be on the lookout. I was able to swerve out of the way and avoid the accident, called 911 and described the vehicle, and made it home safely. Such a crazy story that sometimes I even have trouble believing it. I want to see that man again and tell him, but I go to that same gym still to this day and have never seen him again. I have gone through multiple, typically lethal situations completely unharmed. One was a baby. My sister left me in the bath without looking at the water temperature. She wandered off, leaving me alone, and came back to boiling water, and I was just sitting in it smiling and without any burn marks. When I was 8, I was bound to a wheelchair. One day I was going up the ramp to my house and the chair toppled over. I fell into some very sharp bushes, and my 300-pound wheelchair fell right on top of me, with most of the weight being on my neck. I remember this one very clearly. I didn't feel any pain. It didn't leave any marks, and I didn't even bother calling for help. Was there for a good 10 minutes till they came running in a panic, and though I should have been dead, or at least have broken bones, they still don't believe me when I say I felt nothing. I have gone through what seems to be like heart attacks multiple times, but they just stop and I'm unarmed. I have no way to tell if they are heart attacks, since I get out of it, but it is the exact symptoms my doctors have told me to expect with an heart attack. I have severe pain occasionally on the left of my head. Not sure what it is, but I feel like I'm going to die each time. I went through severe depression from ages 8 to 16, enough that I thought about suicide daily, but something always stopped me. Could have been that I was looking out for my little sister. Could be I assumed I would for soon anyways. I'm out of the depression now I just fear for my life daily. There are probably other cases that I mentally blocked. A lot of the one I shared were, but these are all the ones I can recall. Couple of years ago I needed to get a new passport. So I went to one of those photo booths in a mall to get my pictures taken. I put some coins into it, pressed some buttons, everything seemed to go just fine, until I had to wait for my pictures to come out. And I waited, and waited and waited. Several minutes went by without nothing happening, way longer than what it was supposed to take. Just when I thought duck this shit, I kicked the booth right where its balls would have been as a final duck you, and at the exact moment the pictures came out. I was so amazed that kicking this soulless machine had actually seemed to work. My jaw dropped, and I just started staring at this thing, and I almost grabbed a nearby stranger just to ask him if he saw what I just saw. In my experience, shit like that only happens in the movies and in sitcoms. I always wanted to see a UFO. Until I actually did. When you imagine yourself witnessing a UFO, you tend to imagine that it is off in the distance, way too far to see details. That is exactly what I imagined it would be like. But when I actually did see one, I was less than 50 yards away from it. I was on a country road, all alone. Approx 11 p.m. I saw a bright light above the trees in the distance, so I drive toward it hoping to see a flying saucer. I approached closer and closer, but couldn't actually see it through the trees. Eventually, as I was driving really slow at this point, I came to a clearing where there were no trees, and I had an unobstructed view where I could see it. It was a triangle, best way to describe it. It was hovering perfectly still, no noise whatsoever. As soon as I saw it clearly, I stopped my car, and screamed out, "What the duck is that?" At this point, it either saw my car, or heard me scream out, because as soon as I stopped, it began to fly, or coast, smoother than any vehicle I have ever witnessed. I hit the gas and started to book it out of there, but realized it was leaving too, and I had no evidence of my story. So I busted a U-turn, started driving back toward it. Just as I approached it again, a car was heading my way. The object flew directly over the oncoming car. Whoever was driving in that car came within feet of the thing just overhead. I saw the object fly into the trees across the street from where I originally saw it. Immediately I started honking my horn, flashing headlights at the oncoming car, which was just underneath the flying object. As the car passed by mine, I was stopped in the middle of the highway at this point. The driver of the car looked at me like I was crazy. He had not seen the object fly within feet above his car. I spent several hours more looking toward the sky, from a safe distance, hoping to catch a glimpse with my camera out. Never saw it again though. Back when I was in the military, I met some guy who started telling me things about the Soviet Union that were pretty far out there. For instance, he told me that they were secretly setting up prison camps in the US and they had a plan of attack, and some other things I don't recall specifically. He gave me some info, along with some tapes, audio and video, that sounded like they were debriefing tapes of some sort. I listened to and watched it all, and examined documents that had a map in it showing their plan of attack on the US. He asked if I was interested in learning more and getting involved in helping protect our country from all this. I said that I really didn't want to learn more about it and I thought the guy was a little off. The Waco, Texas stuff he gave me to watch was chilling stuff. Well, years later after the Soviet Union collapsed and a bunch of crap was declassified, I'm watching a documentary on TV and they're talking about some of the stuff he told me about, and then showed the exact same map he showed me. Can't help but to wonder what my life would have been like if I had said yes, and what else was true he showed me. This actually happened recently. I went surfing last month with a friend. It was the first time we both had been out since October. It was basically a washing machine out there. Me being me, I decided to shoot for the outside waves. I ended up in the transition of a rip current into open water. So as I'm about 200 feet past the local pier, I begin to freak out. Waves were breaking, but they were too steep for the type of board I was using and they were closing out. Even if I caught a wave and fell, the current would have sucked me under and God knows what would have happened. As I'm trying to find a way back in, I ended up panicking, which by the way is the worst possible thing to do when surfing. I then saw a fin come out of the water. It started to circle me and I was hyperventilating. I then noticed the fin before I went into complete shock and saw that it was moving up and down unlike the straight motion of a shark's fin. I found out it was a dolphin. It came up to me and I pet it. It was the only thing that kept me calm in the scenario. The dolphin then led me a path to get in between the gap between the waves and back into shore. I finally met up with my friend and told him the story. He got a good laugh out of it. And so did his 300 followers on Twitter. I am pretty certain I'm the origin of the Windows XP viral free public Wi-Fi ad hoc network. I went to a high school that gave loaner laptops to all the students. Despite the misguided best efforts of our IT staff, students often hacked the laptops and put Linux on them or simply tried to remove the control software on them. The school Wi-Fi was really bad, so I set up my laptop to host wireless called free public Wi-Fi automatically and it would share any internet I had access to. This was well before anyone started seeing any of the ad hoc networks called that. At school this was useful because the school was tiny and if the Wi-Fi went down I could go to one of the limited wall Ethernet outlets and everyone could hook up to my network. Coincidentally that year I made many trips via airplane traveling with my family. I'd always get out my laptop and pass the time in the airport playing games or whatever until the flight, all the while being lightly bemused that I was broadcasting a wireless network that was sharing the airport's connection if I was plugged in. I remember at first seeing a lot of seemingly copycat networks at school and slowly realizing it was because most of the students didn't know how to set that kind of thing up and they ended up broadcasting a network of the same name. It is also likely that many of my classmates did some traveling as I grew up in a fairly wealthy town and accidentally the network name as well. More and more that year I'd see that network all over, but it wasn't for a while that I realized I was seeing the network anywhere I went in the country. Always just someone with an XP laptop who didn't know that Microsoft had programmed in an accidental viral bug in XP that was making their laptop try to broadcast an ad hoc network of the name of the last one they tried to connect to if they were unable to find wireless. Of course there's no way to prove it was me and fewer people remember the days of glitchy XP laptops broadcasting that network at airports and elsewhere, but I know it was me.